All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to the promised Unmatched Banquest Draft Guide. Before we start, a few disclaimers. First of all, this draft guide is mainly focused on beginners that maybe just came into the competitive scene or have not drafted at all yet. So this is not just a draft guide for Banquest, but also a kind of overarching guide for how to approach any certain draft. And also for you all that might not have too much time, this will be a long one. So yeah, let's jump right into it and not lose too much time. So the chapters. I'll first talk about some general terminology in the competitive meta that you will have to get used to if you want to understand the rest of the guide, which is actually what is the meta, what is a counter meta, what is a counter pick, what is a ban, what is advantage, what are the big three, and what are passes. Those are just some general terms that you'll see us competitive players throw around every 2 seconds, basically. So it's really important to understand what exactly they mean. Then, second, we will take a look at some fighter categories. This is mostly for all of the newer players that maybe have some favorites and kind of think they know how the fighters generally play. This just gives them a bit of a simpler overview of what characters actually can divide it by. We'll start with map fighters and position fighters. Then after that, we'll jump into the categorization of aggro, value, fatigue, and linear fighters. And then at the end, once we understand all of that, we'll jump into generalists and specialists. After we're done with that, we'll also do kind of the same thing about the maps, just not as in depth. We'll talk about anti-ranged, ranged, aggro, position, and movement maps. And after that, we'll actually get to the format that we're talking about. Banquest. What is Banquest? We'll just explain how the format works. I'll also give a full test draft for you as maybe an example to look at. And then we'll talk about some general strategies that are not too complicated and all of you should probably be able to execute pretty easily. And after that, we'll talk about some advanced strategies that definitely require a bit more game knowledge and you should have played some Banquests before actually trying to do some of those. So let's jump into general terminology. The meta. What is the meta? For me, the meta can be summarized as the pool of fighters that the community sees as the best in the current tournament or format. Therefore, the meta can change with each new set or tournament format. These fighters are usually the most versatile and have many very good matchups and not so many counters in the meta. For example, Yenenga and Bigfoot. So to summarize it, these are probably objectively the best as seen by the community at that point. And of course, if a new set gets released, maybe there are some new fighters that do reasonably good into the current meta, and then the meta might change again because those new fighters will become the new meta. Um, then we'll jump onto the counter meta. Now, what's that? The counter meta, as the name suggests, is a category of fighters that are especially good against the current meta, but maybe bad against the rest. Um, Good examples for this are maybe Sinbad, Wukong to some extent, Raptors, Bullseye. It's characters that definitely have their glaring weaknesses. Maybe Sinbad actually against Wukong, Ingen, um, higher ups, Electra. But if those are gone and certain meta fighters are picked, these characters are exactly there to counter the current meta. That's why they're called the counter meta. These two kind of always cycle, since if any meta fighters get played a lot, people will start picking the counter meta to counter the meta fighters. Which then will, of course, lead to more off-meta picks, because if the counter meta is good against the meta, we just don't pick the meta to counter the counter meta. And since the counter to the counter meta gets countered by the meta, we cycle again. I hope this makes sense. Um, so yeah, these just technically would roll in a circle, but in a draft, of course, that just means you have to watch out for to whichever direction your draft tends to. If you tend to go for a full meta draft, your opponent will probably go for some counter meta picks, and then you probably go for some off meta picks, and yeah, just that you understand this basic cycle. Now, well, since we already had counter meta, let's also define what a counter pick is. A counter pick can be described as a pick that was done for the sole purpose of countering one or two of your opponent's fighters. Let's say your opponent has maybe Yanenga and Little Red. Then you can, of course, pick Sinbad because he directly shuts down those two characters and is really good against them, even though he might suck against the other characters that your opponent has. Other examples would be Wukong into someone like Moon Knight or Bigfoot or Sinbad himself. Um, so these fighters usually have very polarized matchups where they easily win against 50% of the characters but easily lose against the other 50%. So you have to be very careful when to pick them. But since in Banquest you get a bit more knowledge of what your opponent already has, counter picks are definitely very interesting and you have to think about them. Now, what is a ban, you may ask? If a fighter or map is banned, that fighter or map may not be picked by either player. This can be quite helpful to deny certain counter picks or to get rid of some of the strongest fighters in the current meta, and also just to get rid of some very bad maps for your current fighter. It's just to balance out that some players get to pick maps, some players get to pick position, and just to get a good little balance in there, and that's what bans are for. So ban just means, well, that's not allowed. Kind of simplified. Then, since I already talked about some players get maps, some players get position, advantage. What does advantage mean? There are two types of advantages in the current Banquest format. When a player has map advantage, their opponent bans 3 maps. Then the player with the map advantage may choose any other map to play the game on. Now, this of course is really important because maps in Unmatched are very different from each other, as you might have noticed already. So getting to choose which map you play a certain game on can really elevate your fighter or turn down the opponent's fighter. And that's why your opponent has 3 map bans before you actually pick, to also kind of counteract that and not have the worst possible outcome, because in that case it will probably be a free win for you most of the time because the maps are just so polarized. Then, when a player has position advantage, they can choose whether to start the game as player 1 or player 2. So you can choose whether you want to go first or second. This is usually not as important as map regarding like how the matchup actually turns out to be, but in some cases it's definitely still very important, and you might even want to start as player 2 in some cases. Banquest is played with split advantage. That means one player always gets map advantage and one player gets position advantage. That might change throughout the games depending on who loses and wins their games, but there's never a point where one player gets both map advantage and position advantage. It's always split. Now, big three. How boy does the community love their big three. Um, because the community has started a trend where they deem the best 3 fighters in the current meta to be the big three. The term is used since those fighters usually are a step above the power level of the other fighters, even the other ones in the current meta. For example, in this meta, the current big three are Sherlock, Elektra, and Doctor Strange, who are all just equally stupid in their own regards and just so insanely strong. Um, and since they are so strong, players will usually tend to ban them as soon as possible in any draft, or if they don't ban them, they should definitely have a plan for them. They do have counters, sure, but they are so specific that it's really hard to actually execute it. And then lastly, we'll talk about a quite easy one, passes. A pass is a scheme that does not draw cards or gain actions. Or to be more specific, a pass is a scheme that uses an action without decreasing your current deck count. Of course, attacks can also be passes if you attack your opponent and don't draw cards or gain an action from it. An attack can be passed, but I will refer to passes in the later slides. Um, as schemes that basically just don't decrease your deck count, so they are fatigue tools. And now we'll get into Chapter 2, the fighter categories. The fighters of Unmatched can generally be divided by many means. Very relevant for Banquest is the distinction between map fighters and position fighters. These fighters, as the name suggests already, heavily rely on having either map advantage or position advantage, which of course limits their general versatility and makes them easier to predict, because if you don't have map advantage, well, you probably won't pick a fighter that needs map advantage. Other than that, fighters can also be categorized in more common categories that you might have seen in other games, such as maybe aggro fighters that just tend to have a lot of aggression and draw a lot of cards, fatigue fighters that just don't draw many cards but have a lot of passes, which means they will usually try to exhaust the opponent, value fighters that rely on many discards or good movement effects that make the opponent boost and therefore lose a lot of their actual card value, and then the linear fighters that kind of tend to maneuver and attack every turn without many tricks or just do one thing all over again, um, as we'll see later. So let's start with map fighters. As said before, these fighters are heavily relying on having map advantage for them to work properly. Without map advantage, otherwise favorable matchups for them can turn to being even or actually unfavored. On the other hand, usually even matchups can become very favored or even free wins for them if they play on the right map. So very good examples for this are Arthur, because Arthur has a low mobility, he wants a very small map. Invisible Man, on the other hand, wants a pretty large map because he's so mobile with his fog tokens. Muldoon wants a good map to actually set his traps in good positions to shut the opponent off. Um, Achilles wants a small map to actually make use once he's angry to actually reach every turn and smack the opponent to death. Same with T-Rex, small map with kind of good zoning for ripples to attack every turn. Bullseye wants a map with move 4 centers so he can always attack um, each turn basically. Daredevil and Winter Soldier, more so larger maps where they can run away. She-Hulk, good map for her throwing. Bat, move 4 center, or maybe a larger one where he can run away. Oda, quite connected map where he actually can like get his flanking with the honor guards, and then Tomoe also zoning again, probably a lot of hard cutoffs where she can get her ability. Overall, these are definitely not all fighters that want map advantage, but probably the most like jarring ones that need it the most or want it the most. So yeah, whenever you play one of these fighters, I would consider them map fighters. So try to get them on your map advantage. And then the, on the contrast for that, we have the position fighters. These fighters usually heavily rely on either going first or second to make their game plan work. Usually first, although there are some exceptions. Going first, of course, can turn unfavored matchups into favored ones with a good first turn, whereas going second can turn favored matchups into unfavored ones if you maybe don't get a lot of aggression at the start. That is also why you will see many of the aggro fighters, which we'll talk about next, here as position fighters as well, because of course if you're aggressive or you want to be aggressive, you want to go first to get an early hand lead and attack as soon as possible. So example of this are Sinbad, Robin Hood, Raptors, who just pretty much want to attack ASAP and build up their hand. Then Wukong, who wants to start with summoning clones before the opponent can actually get to him. Moon Knight, who wants to just get rid of his Moon Knight form ASAP and be scary. Khonshu, Bruce, again, wants to build up hand. Houdini, again, wants to instantly use his set a stage boost and then rip someone a card out of the way and then smack them really hard to put up pressure. Genie, also maybe going for a third action turn or just building up his hand, digging for wishes pretty early. Widow and Tesla again want to aggress very much, same as Titania and Sisters. Now, aggro fighters. These are not too dissimilar from the position fighters, but there are some small differences. These fighters can usually be identified by their lack of defenses, or just bad defenses overall, low health total, high card draw, and generally just aggressive playstyle. Usually aggro fighters are good answers against fatigue fighters, since Those tend to have less card draw and rely on a lot of passes to win in Fatigue, which means if they have a lot of passes, they probably also have less defenses, which means if you just attack them often enough and pressure, you might just kill them before they actually get to the end of the game. So pressure is your biggest strength with these fighters. Examples: Luke just doesn't give a shit, punches you the whole time. Robin wants to attack every turn. Raptors just want to go in there, attack you 3 or 4 times per turn, and then back off again. Mary, of course, wants to keep pressure with her ability. Rex attacks every turn. Bruce can combo. Houdini can warp around the map and just instant attack. Genie can go very aggro with his 3 action turns. Oda also has a lot of draw. Tesla, Titania's sisters. It's those typical fighters where you sometimes just go unga bunga slap, but it's really cool. Then, fatigue fighters. These fighters can usually be identified by their lack of card draw, high health total, and large amount of passes, and lack of actually damage. Um, Fatigue fighters try to keep the game going for as long as possible dying to exhaust, um, without dying to exhaust the opponent. So you just run away and hope that the opponent draws through their deck faster than you do because you often just don't have many high damaging attacks yourself, so you need that fatigue damage to actually finish the opponent off. They are often pretty good into value fighters since they have a high amount of passes, which means the value fighters might need to boost a lot to actually reach you because you're just passing with your schemes the whole time, which means the value fighters lose their value, so they also lose their purpose. Um, some examples for fatigue fighters would be, for example, Invisible Man, Dracula, Sherlock, InGen, some Muldoon, Elektra, Daredevil, Winter Soldier, Strange, She-Hulk, Golden Bat, or Beowulf. You'll see a lot of the top tiers and also all of the big three characters here, because if you have an insane fatigue game and can just afford to run away on any map without actually having to approach the opponent, that just means your opponent loses a lot of value. You will survive and then just outlast, which is just the most boring way to play Unmatched, but sadly also the strongest, which is why you see like 4 out of the 5 best characters in the game in this example. So yeah. And then we get to the value fighters. These fighters can usually be identified by their large amount of discard or just good movement effects that make the opponent boost, so the opponent loses value. Value fighters tend to drive the opponent out of resources to deliver an undefended finishing blow, so if the opponent, for example, doesn't have defenses anymore because you attacked them so often, or they had to discard a lot of cards because of your effects, or they had to boost a lot and then maybe boosted away onto defenses, that's exactly what you're aiming for. Value fighters are often extremely versatile, so they don't have many like glaring counters where, oh yeah, that's definitely a hard counter to them, because since they have so many discard effects or movement, they are quite versatile. And since they are so versatile, they might also be able to pursue a different game plan in each matchup, which is why you might see some of them in other categories as well. So, well, the most prevalent example of a value fighter that probably just comes to your mind instantly when you read that second sentence there is Medusa. Medusa, of course, has 6 discards, and her whole game plan resolves around actually driving the opponent out of defense and then delivering the undefended Gaze of Stone at the end for 10 damage, which, of course, before usually doesn't work. Then Bigfoot can be quite a good value fighter just because he's so maneuverable, he has so many good movement effects, so the opponent will often have to boost. Little Rat with random discards from stones and hands that can just return cards. Wukong, of course, just resolves around value the whole time. The opponent just punches through 1 health sidekicks while you smack them with 2-for-1 trades. Um, Yen also value monster, Moon Knight as well. Joe shuffling extra cards back. Strange can also just play a value game if he doesn't want to go fatigue. He can just recur all of his cards with his ability, so he increases his deck size and yeah, has more cards. Value, woohoo. Widow with her schemes, making discards. Bat is just a value monster. Tomoe also 4 discards, really good. And then Tesla, technically 6 discards, if you intend to use him that way. And then lastly, for the normal-ish fighter types, we get to the linear fighters. These fighters can usually be identified by their linear playstyle, which means that they often have a single set game plan at the start of the game, which usually is to maneuver and attack every turn, although there are some exceptions. They often don't have many tricks up their sleeves, but excel in the one thing that they actually do. So they also tend to have a decent amount of card draw, good damage overall, which makes them quite good answers to aggro fighters because if you have a decent amount of damage and good card draw, you can punish the aggro fighters who have low health and lack of defenses. So if you can withstand that pressure and then punish them by attacking back, that's where you actually win. So good examples are Alice, +2, good card draw, slaps big. Bigfoot can also be a quite linear fighter if he just maneuvers and slaps you each turn with 6s or 4s. Sinbad is basically just the print example of a linear fighter. He can't do anything but maneuver, attack, maneuver, attack, maneuver, attack. Achilles can be quite linear because once Pat is dead, you just maneuver, attack every turn again. Sattler as well. Ghost Rider is one exception where you don't maneuver attack, you just maneuver and roam the whole time, often at least, so that's an exception. Miss Marvel, Spider-Man, Annie, Hamlet, those are just the pretty easy, just maneuver slap fighters. Shakespeare, of course, could be a bit more complex with his line, but since he doesn't have any passes or any way to force initiative onto the opponent usually, he's also just maneuvering, attacking every turn, whereas the opponent can then just mess with his line. And then Buffy, you could also technically put all of the other Buffy characters here because they're all very linear and just maneuver slap. And yeah. Now that we have a simplified understanding of how unmatched characters can be sorted, let's jump into one last distinction that is of a more advanced nature and combines the general archetypes with map and position fighters, the generalists and the specialists. So on paper, these two terms might not seem too different from the before mentioned linear fighters or value fighters, but there are key differences. Generalists are usually the jack of all trades characters that don't excel in anything but have a variety of options at their disposal regarding game plan, map, or position, which means they don't require any setup. They're basically just good against everyone with some kind of playstyle, and you don't need to think about, oh, damn, when do I pick them? How do I pick them? What do I need to set up? No, you can just always go them. Where, on the other hand, specialists are basically the exact opposite. Their whole kit revolves around one specific mechanic or tactic that they either just get to work or they lose. Therefore, therefore, they often rely on things like a good map or position to execute their game plan. So you have to exactly know what your plan will be. You have to set them up on the right map or with the right position and against the right fighters so they are really just specialized for one specific thing, which is why they also have the name specialists. But let's start with the generalists. If you are at the start of any draft or you just don't exactly know what your strategy will be, generalists are just usually the way to go. Um, Also, if you want to be versatile with your roster and be prepared for anything that your opponent might pick and throw at you, these fighters are just your option. They are basically always good in some way and never have like very big counters. We have Medusa, Bigfoot, Little Red, Yanenga, Luke Cage, Moon Knight, Black Widow, Jill, Goldenback, Tesla, and Tomoe. All of them are just really versatile, can switch between playstyles, have a variety of options, and don't really care about a certain thing that much. Even though some of them might have been in map or position category, um, since they have so many options, it often isn't that important just for that one specific game plan it might be. And then we get to the specialists. Um, if you are midway through a draft and already have a bit of knowledge about what the opponent picked, you can start thinking about specialists. These fighters often do really well against specific characters, but require the needed setup. Since at this point you already know some of your opponent's fighters and you know about your advantages, you can safely pick some of these fighters. For example, Sinbad. Specialists just get shut down by Wukong or any like psychic character, one health psychic character, and then therefore, whereas if the opponent is someone like Yenenga or doesn't have a lot of card draw or limited amount of cancels, Sinbad can be really good. Invisible Man on the right map against a low health character, very good. Raptors against someone who doesn't have a way to escape pins or break a combo turn, really good. InGen can just shut down the typical melee characters just as Wukong. Um, Achilles needs the right map to function because otherwise he will just exhaust. Same with T-Rex. She-Hulk needs the right map to actually make use of her ability. Houdini definitely needs good setup with going first against the right characters. Ghost Rider also needs a really good map and just specializes in dealing with one health sidekicks. Um, Genie is just so complex that you always need to set him up perfectly. And then Daredevil, you could also put Winter Soldier there, to be honest. Just needs that really good fatigue game plan on a good map against the right fighter, and then they are really good. So here you have a quick summary. You can maybe take a screenshot out of this, and if you wanna just look if you're in a draft and see again, well, I do have map advantage next. Which fighter should I maybe pick? Should I pick someone like T-Rex or should I pick Houdini? Well, then you can look at this and see, oh, T-Rex is a map fighter, Houdini is a position fighter, so you might want to pick T-Rex. And then lastly, I also put my latest competitive tier list here, just for you as reference when to pick which character, how strong the characters are in the current meta. Um, if you want some more detailed explanation on why I put certain characters where they are, just go watch my tier list video. If I don't forget, I should have linked that in the description. Um, Otherwise, you should be able to find it quite easily because I haven't made so many videos yet. So yeah. And now let's get to chapter 3, the map categories. Now that we understand the different categories that fighters can be sorted in, why don't we do the same thing with maps? When talking about map categories, a few might come to mind. First, like anti-ranged or ranged map. Both are quite self-explanatory in countering or benefiting ranged characters. However, I would say that the maps of Unmatched are a bit more complex than that. I would, for example, add some categories like position maps, movement maps, and aggro maps that all serve their own purpose in why you would actually pick them, or, on the other hand, maybe you want to ban them. Also, many maps can, of course, fall under multiple categories at once because few maps are just actually, oh yeah, I am purely a ranged map and nothing else. That is pretty rare. So, yeah. You might see some of them twice or 3 times actually. Let's start with the anti-ranged maps. As the name says, these maps are pretty simple to understand. They heavily favor melee characters and try to shut down ranged characters to some degree, which means if you're a melee character facing a ranged character, you definitely want to pick one of these maps. They can often be identified by many spots that force adjacency or just bad zone coverage overall. Very good examples are McMinnville, which is just a nightmare for ranged characters, um, Globe Theater with the single zone spots, or just where you have the 2 spaces that are just the one zone with the browns on the bottom and the left, which are just nightmares for ranged. The zone coverage is just abysmal overall. Herod, where you can just shut the doors really well. Raptor Paddock has these wonderful 2 force adjacency spaces on the bottom right in the yellow and the top left in the white-ish there. And then basketball, I would say as well. Just because the zone coverage is not that great, you're always within a single maneuver of a ranged character usually, so they can't actually use their ranged bonus. Plus, you have the passageways to escape them pretty easily and make them boost. So they again lose a lot of their benefit that they have from being ranged. And then on the other side of that, we have the ranged maps. In contrast to the anti-ranged maps, the ranged maps favor ranged fighters. Who would have thought? Um, a lot and often shut down melee fighters. Reason for this is often the lack of forced adjacency. You have the good zone coverage and overall size of the map because, of course, if your fighter is ranged, you don't have to boost as much. So, on a larger map, you will certainly do better than any melee fighter who actually has to travel the whole distance. Good examples for ranged maps are Point Pleasant, Soho, Sanctum, Sherwood, and Memorial. As you see, mo basically all of them except Soho just have large, really big zones, just few cutoffs, hard zone cutoffs, or forced adjacency, or actually none in the example of Sherwood. And then Soho, you might ask, why is it here? Soho and Point Pleasant and Sanctum actually have something that we in competitive call a Robin spot, which means there is a move to center for ranged characters. In Soho, it's just the central white space. From there on, you can reach every single zone with a movement of 2, so you can always attack, which is why it is here. If you want a bit more explanation on that, I would recommend my Maps of Unmatched video that I did a while ago. Um, it had its flaws, but still for a newcomer, it's definitely good for additional knowledge. Then we'll get to position maps. I would define a position map as a map with important choke points or item tokens that just require good positioning. These maps are usually great for fighters with high board control, so meaning fighters that have a lot of bodies on the board, maybe multi-sidekicks, or they are just dual heroes or triple heroes like Raptors or Sisters. Um, and they are really bad for solo fighters with low board control. Very good example of this is, of course, Sarpedon. You have the bridges, which if you just put one health sidekick in there, you lock one side of the board just completely off, which is insane. T-Rex Paddock technically can do the same on the right, where you can just put one health sidekick in the gray, and yeah, that's it. Then, of course, all of the item maps, item tokens, they require you occupying that space of the token. So if you have more characters on the board, more bodies, you of course can occupy more tokens and get to use more of them, which is kind of self-explanatory. And then Hanging Gardens, I would also consider a position map because you don't want to be standing in low ground the whole time. But if you can um, shield yourself from high ground a lot, that can still help. And then we get to movement maps. Movement maps are basically maps that give the players extra tools when moving around or just overall favor highly maneuverable fighters to make use of the size of the map. Um, they are usually good options if your fighter has a higher movement value and more movement effects than the opponent. On these maps, kiting is the key. Kiting meaning, for example, if you go and attack the opponent, you then have a movement effect to back off against, so they have to approach you, maybe boost, travel some distance, so that you then can double attack in return. Example for movement maps, we have Soho, where you can just abuse the rooftop very well. Raptor Paddock, which of course limits your movement options by the one-way arrows. Um, I would say the bronze is also a pretty good movement map just because it's so large from end to end. Same with Azuchi. Then we have the secret passages with Baskerville and Solomon's, which should be quite self-explanatory. Yukon, the largest map in the game. It doesn't seem like it, but it's stupid. If you have a lower movement value than the opponent, you're just fucked. Um, and then I also put Sunnydale Hill just because it can also be quite large from end to end and has actually these cool little choke points in the purple or pink zones where you can force the opponent into uncomfortable situations. And yeah, then we get to the aggro maps, the last ones. As the name suggests, these maps are perfect if you want to play an aggressive fighter with a lot of card draw that just wants to maintain pressure throughout the game. Aggro maps tend to be very small with decent zone coverage, meaning that you can basically almost reach the opponent in maybe a single maneuver, maybe boost one, and then you're there. Um, Aggro maps, for example, are Sanctum, the only move 3 center map in the whole game. Point Pleasant, Raptor Paddock, T-Rex Paddock, Globe, Herod, Gardens. Those are just They're really small. They have good zone coverage usually. Um, and you can just go unga bunga. Really cool. And yeah, there you have all the categories again in one single slide. So take a screenshot if you want to. If you want some more detailed explanation on all of the maps, again, I would recommend to check out my Maps of Unmatched video. So yeah, let's jump into the next thing. What the hell is Banquest? Hey, we finally made it. We talked 30 minutes about not Banquest and now we're here. Woohoo! Um, so this will just be a small explanation on how the format works in chronological order. Holy macaroni. And then after that there will be an example draft. So yeah, if you don't understand everything here or can't follow the whole time, we'll see. You'll get to understand it quite soon. At the start of the draft, randomly determine which player gets the choice of being leader or follower. What that is, we'll get to. Players take turns banning 3 fighters, each starting with a leader. So leader bans 1 fighter, follower bans 1 fighter, leader bans 1 fighter, so on until both ban 3. After each player banned 3 fighters, players will start to pick their fighters in the following order. Leader picks 1, follower picks 2, leader picks 2, follower picks 2, leader picks 1. Now, both players should have a roster of 4 characters at this point, and then both players secretly pick 1 character to ban from their opponent's roster, which means you can get rid of them. Woohoo! Um, After that, both players also secretly ban 1 character to ban from their own roster, which means, hey, if you fucked up and you pick someone who's bad, you can just say, oh no, he's gone. Really cool. This way, both players end up with 2 characters. In the first game, the leader will have position advantage and follower will have map advantage. In every following game, the loser of the previous game decides which advantage they want, so either position or map. Also, fighters that already won a game may not be picked again. What does that tell us to us? Well, Banquest is a reactive format. You get a lot of information about the opponent's picks because you basically take turns picking fighters, so you know what they already have, whereas in other formats like Arsenal, you usually don't. You pick at the same time and just secretly and then just reveal it. So this time you have way more information. You can react to what your opponent is doing. So you need a bit more knowledge of exactly what's happening. Since leader gets position advantage in the first game, he can only have 1 map advantage throughout the whole game. If you recall, you only get the choice of advantage after the first game if you already lost 1 game. So let's say you're a leader, you get position advantage in the first game, then you lose the first game, so you get to choose map advantage in the second one, for example. If you lose again, well, you lost because there's a max of 3 games, so if you lose 2 of them, you've lost. So yeah, the only other case is you win, which means the opponent will get to choose, which means for the last game they will get to choose map, for example, again. So you can usually only get 1 single map advantage, which is in the second or technically third game. Which is quite important because that might influence what fighters you want to pick. Follower, on the other hand, can usually only have 1 position advantage throughout the whole game. That's usually not as important, but it can still come into play. You have a total of 10 bans throughout the draft to influence the strength of characters. There's 6 pre-bans where you both ban 3 fighters taking turns. Then you both ban 1 fighter from your opponent, so another 2 bans, and then you both ban 1 fighter from yourself, so another 2. That sums up to 10. So actually, the tier list that we had before, usually if you just ban the top 10 characters, the matchups will shift dramatically. So yeah, you can definitely influence the draft a lot. Now, let's jump into a test draft. With this one, we will just say for simplicity reasons that player A is the leader, player B is the follower, which means we start with all characters and now player A will have the choice to ban a character at the start. Let's say we ban Sherlock. Sherlock is one of the big three and is insanely annoying. He is the best character in the game, so it definitely makes sense to get rid of him. Um, Player B, the follower, then decides to jump on that trend and also get rid of Electra. It definitely makes sense because who likes Electra? Um, Player A, after that, bans Strange. Definitely makes sense. Big three out of the way. Now we have just the normal-ish characters left. Player B then is a just quality guy. He bans Golden Bat. Really cool. I love Player B. Um, Whereas Player A after that decides to ban Sun Wukong because monkeys are annoying. I don't know. And Player B lastly has the last ban and decides to ban Medusa. Now we have our 6 bans complete. So picking begins, and let's say player A as the leader, he has the first pick, so he will start with picking Yenenga. Player B as the follower now has 2 picks at the same time. Um, of course, he already knows that player A has Yenenga, so he probably wants to pick 2 fighters that are decently good into Yenenga while not having many counters themselves. He decides to go for Tesla and She-Hulk, definitely reasonable to picks. Um, Now player A has 2 picks again. He goes for Achilles and Bigfoot. It's fine overall. Tesla seems to be quite bad right now because both Achilles and Bigfoot are really good against him, but we'll see how that unfolds. Right now player B has 2 picks, so he goes for InGen and Moon Knight. InGen, of course, really good into Achilles and still decent into Bigfoot. Moon Knight also decent into these two. So we see a trend where player B might expect to ban Yenenga, for example, because both Moon Knight and InGen are really good into both Achilles and Bigfoot. So it makes sense to keep those two around. And now player A has the last pick, which, as you might remember, is the perfect time to go for a specialist, because now you already know which 4 characters your opponent has, so you can pick the one single character that is just good against everyone. Raptors! Woohoo! Raptors might not be so good into InGen, but it's still fine, and the Raptors just destroy all of the other 3, so really cool. Now, we get to the part where you ban one of the opponent's fighters. Let's first start by taking player A's perspective. Tesla is not really a problem. Yenenga is even with him. Um, Achilles usually wins. Bigfoot usually wins. Raptors usually wins. So you don't need to ban Tesla. She-Hulk is also not that bad. Yen is even with her. Bigfoot and Achilles are both even with her. And Raptors are good against her. So She-Hulk is also no problem. InGen is a problem. Yen might instantly destroy him, but InGen is really good against Achilles, basically a free win for InGen. InGen is decent into Bigfoot, and InGen is really good into Raptors. So InGen might be a good candidate for a ban. Lastly, let's take a look at Moon Knight. Moon Knight is a bit bad against Yen, is really good against Achilles, and decent into Bigfoot. Again, gets stumped by Raptors, so he's not the big problem. So the reasonable solution is to ban InGen. Now let's take a look at player B's perspective. Yen is just decent into everyone. She's just fine. She doesn't really shut down any of your characters, but she's also like not bad against any of them. Achilles is not really a big problem. Yeah, sure, you have Tesla who sucks against Achilles, but She-Hulk is fine. InGen wins, and Moon Knight also usually wins against Achilles. Bigfoot is also like no big problem. Again, Tesla might suffer, but She-Hulk is fine. InGen is fine. Moon Knight is fine. Raptors, however, win against 3 of your characters. They win against Tesla, they win against She-Hulk, and they win against Moon Knight. So, well, let's ban Raptors. Definitely makes sense. Now we get into the self-ban. Let's again take a look at player A's perspective. Yen is just decent into all 3 of the opponent's characters. Achilles sucks against Moon Knight, but is good against Tesla and decent into She-Hulk. And Bigfoot is just good overall. Again, very good against Tesla, but even with both She-Hulk and Moon Knight. So Achilles seems like the best ban here. Whereas for player B, Tesla's just sucks against Bigfoot and Achilles, whereas She-Hulk is just decent against everyone, and Moon Knight is just a bit bad against Yen, but still okay, so the self-ban should be Tesla. Now, who do we play on the first game? We have Yanenga and Bigfoot for player A against Moon Knight and She-Hulk for player B. Again, player A, being the leader, has position advantage in the first game, and player B, as the follower, has map advantage. Now, this is where you might want to take a look again at what are position fighters, what are map fighters. For player A, it's not really that relevant because both Yen and Bigfoot work on both map and position advantage and they don't really care. Whereas for player B has She-Hulk, and She-Hulk really wants map advantage. So since player B has map advantage right now, why don't we go She-Hulk? And player A just went Bigfoot because player A doesn't really care. Um, let's jump into game one. Um, of course, since player B has map advantage, player A now has to think about which 3 maps do I ban. She-Hulk likes good zones for her ability, small maps would move her center, and extra starting spaces because of Jennifer Walters' ESQ. So best 3 bans would probably be something like Sanctum, Raptor Paddock, and Point Pleasant. So that's what Bigfoot will ban in this case. And now She-Hulk, of course, has to think about which map do I pick. Again, I want good zones. I want ideally a move for center. And I want to have as few ways as possible for Bigfoot to hide Jack. So things that come to mind. T-Rex Paddock is quite good for you. Sunnydale's just decent overall. And if you want to go with something like an item map, because Bigfoot will usually have to approach you, something like Helicarrier might be a good way to go because you have the 2 damage scheme item, which is of course really good against Bigfoot. And yeah, so you'll probably pick one of these 3. So let's say Bigfoot somehow still won that game, and now it's your choice as player B again, which fighter do I pick? Since you lost the game, you now get to choose both which fighter you pick and which advantage you want. So Moon Knight, as we discussed earlier, is slightly bad against Yen, so he probably needs more help by picking the advantage for him than She-Hulk does, although She-Hulk probably needs map, and this will be the last time you get map advantage, but She-Hulk can still probably do fine into Yen if she gets position only, and Moon Knight just needs the help, all the help that he can get. So we will play Moon Knight with position advantage, because Moon Knight's win condition in this matchup is usually just to kill Yen. Um, you have a vulnerable first turn as Moon Knight himself. You want to get to control ASAP, put up pressure on Yen because Yen doesn't have draw, and then if you don't manage to kill her, you can still play a good fatigue game afterwards. But for that to work, you need to not get pressured by Yen's double attacks and so many 2-for-1 trades that you probably want to go first. So now it's player B's turn. Which maps do I ban? Good range maps, of course, for Yen. Move 5 center maps, because Moon Knight usually wants a move 4 center map to get a good Travelers of the Night turn. And maps with good zoning would also be a good ban target. So Memorial, Sherwood, Soho, 3 of the good range maps that we discussed earlier definitely makes sense. Whereas Yanenga, of course, now thinks about which map do I pick. She wants a good map for range. She wants probably a move 5 center and good zoning. Sadly, there's nothing that actually fills in all 3 of those categories, so something like Bronze, Sunnydale, or T-Rex Paddock could work. I think all are reasonable for her to pick, although I would probably have gone for Rex Paddock. Who knows? Um, but yeah, that about the usual way how a draft goes. Um, let's talk about some general strategies. However, before we do all of that, if you're actually new to this whole competitive playing and drafting thing, pick the fighters that you know well and that you're comfortable with. On the other hand, ban the ones that you don't like playing against or playing as. If they are annoying to you and you don't understand them fully, ban them. It's way better if you play a matchup that you know with a suboptimal fighter than playing a matchup that you have never played with a character that you have never played, even if the matchup might be favorable for you. Because if you don't know what you should do, well, probably won't be that good. However, if you know what you're doing, you probably have a higher shot of winning. So, as leader. As leader, you get the first pick. This means that in any given draft, you can always get the best fighter at the start. So you basically have first choice. You can always get the first one that you definitely want to have, which is really good. Try to free your first pick from its counters with your three bans. For example, if you want to pick Yanenga, you might want to ban out Sinbad and Golden Bat before, and then you can pick Yanenga safely as first pick, and she doesn't have many counters, and now she's really cool. Um, you also only have map advantage once, so maybe try to only have one map fighter on your roster. Um, you do, however, get 2 times position, so position fighters might be your way to go. Someone like Houdini, Tesla might be more in your sights. You also have the last pick, which is usually the best time for you to go for any specialists. So before that, maybe try to be as vague as possible with your draft direction, which characters you do actually pick, and then once your opponent got their fighters, you can get a really good, maybe a Raptors pick as we saw before. Um, you drive the draft, so the follower always will have to react to your decisions. No matter what you pick, the follower has to answer. That is something that you can abuse, but it's really cool to have this option of dictating where the draft goes, which direction we pick. Do we go for just melee Unga Bunga characters? In which case you before ban Wukong or Injin. Um, do we just go with decent value fighters like Yen or Little Red? And yeah, it's really cool to have that option. On the other side, as follower, um, you're of course reactive the whole draft. That has ups and downs. This means you usually can't go for any flashy specialist pick or free a certain fighter, since well the opponent can just pick the fighter that you freed before with your bans, and if you go for a specialist, well the opponent still as leader has the last pick, so they can still counter your pick, which is not great. Um, you do, however, have the last ban, which might be important to flip the leader's plan. If they, for example, freed up Yanenga first, and you notice that, okay, you can last ban Yanenga, and now they're maybe screwed. Who knows? Um, as follower, you get 2 map advantages, so map fighters might be your way to go very often. Someone like T-Rex, Achilles, She-Hulk, those are like your primary targets. Um, since you don't have the last pick, you have to be very careful not to get countered by any specialists in the end. However, if you go for generalists, usually like they define your roster, and then you shouldn't uh, get into much trouble because you can't take many risks. You do, however, get the knowledge on the leader's picks before picking yourself, which can give you an advantage in countering their fighters, because the leader, of course, starts with their first fighter, and you can pick 2 counters to that fighter. Leader gets 2 fighters, you can again pick 2 counters, and yeah, so you're the reactionary um, advisor here. So yeah, that's definitely a huge advantage, and since you just try to go for a safe route overall as follower, it's probably for any newcomer easy to go as follower than to be a leader. And now we'll jump into the advanced strategies. This part is not necessary to understand the Banquest draft. If you watched until now, I think you should have a general understanding on how drafting in competitive Unmatched works, what you have to watch out for, what good picks are, what you actually like need to know about certain character archetypes, map archetypes, and what you have to watch out for. Any strategy from now on requires extensive game and matchup knowledge, so you should probably have played a lot of Banquest, maybe 10 or 15 even, before actually trying some of these upcoming strategies out yourself, because they are definitely nothing for beginners, because you might not understand what they actually do and how to play as or against them. So, the big 3 paradox. In the pre-bans, mostly as follower, you have the option to leave one character out of the big three through the draft. Now, you might say, what the hell, why should I do that? If you do, the leader will most likely pick it. So, well, you have one of the best 3 characters in the games against you. Huh? The idea of this strategy is that you preemptively decide to use your opponent ban on that fighter. So, once you picked all of your 4 fighters each, you basically decided on the first pick that you will ban, maybe if you let Sherlock through, Sherlock. This way, the leader basically wasted their first pick, and now you get the actual 2 strongest characters, out of which the leader can, of course, only ban 1. So they wasted their privilege of getting the first pick, um, whereas you now basically have both first and second pick, out of which the opponent can only ban 1, so you definitely get the best character that is still left in the current draft. This of course requires you to be extra careful not to get countered by a very good last pick. So if you preemptively decide, yep, I will ban Sherlock from him, um, if you then get fucked by something like a good Raptors or Sinbad pick at the end, well, yeah, you're done. You should not let that happen. So you definitely have to be extra careful if you do this. However, if it works, it's usually pretty well. However, as leader on the other side, to prevent this from happening, you only really have one good option, which is to ban all the big 3 yourself, thereby kind of wasting your 3 bans, because those 3 characters will probably be banned anyways. This might sound really bad, but it prevents you from wasting your first pick, which definitely is, in my point of view, a way more valuable tool for you to have. And it also gives the follower more room to slip up on the bans. What I mean by that is, if a big 3 is on your draft, well, the follower will just know, okay, I just banned that one. There's not much room for error. If there is not a big 3 member, the opponent might have to think a bit more and might have a worse time to actually decide on which character to ban, which means they might make a mistake. Of course, you have the option as leader to just not pick Sherlock as well, but in that case, well, you give it to the follower and it becomes really bad again. Um, it's possible, but from there on, it just becomes really complicated and more so about mind games than actual draft. So I'll skip about that. Now, the 2 versus 1 draft. Due to the nature of Banquest, if one of the players ends their draft with 2 characters that directly counter one of the opponent's characters, they usually win. For example, in this case, player A on the left, for example, picked Yanenga and Houdini as their last 2 after the bans, whereas player B ended their draft with Sidbad and Goldenbat. It doesn't matter that you lose one game against your opponent's other character. For example, if the leader picked Houdini first because, well, they have position advantage, and you picked Goldenbat, well, Goldenbat will just get destroyed. But that's fine, because once that character wins, it cannot be played again. So if Houdini wins against Goldenbat, well, Houdini can't be played again. Which is good, because now both of your left characters are good against Yanenga, and Yanenga is the only character that your opponent can play. So you basically get the win. On the other side, if you somehow manage to win the Houdini versus Goldenbat, well, you already got your win with Goldenbat, and then Houdini might win against Sinbad, but even if he does, you then get the win with Sinbad against Yen. So, yeah. In any case, if you get into this situation, you basically have already won before even playing a single card. This way, both of your characters get the win against your target, and you win, just like I said. Now, tempting to bad picks. The idea behind this strategy is not to always pick the 100% best character, but maybe a character that might be still good, but it's just not the best. This will then incentivize your opponent to just pick the otherwise best character that you should have picked before, maybe. But this way, you can basically force them to pick the characters that you want them to pick. After you did this, and they have exactly the characters that you want them to have, you deliver the finishing blow with exactly the right specialist pick at the end. To note, this is strategy is probably a bit better for leader, just because you have last pick and first pick, so you can drive this more easily, which is why in the example we will also do this as the leader right now. Um, we already got our 6 bans. I will not go over them. The best the best pick right now would arguably be someone like Yanenga, but in picking someone like Medusa, on the other hand, you incentivize your opponent to pick either Yen, Tesla, or Jill, any combination of these two, because they all do pretty well into Dusa. Um, it's not like a big hard counter, but it's definitely like pretty well. It's good picks for them, and all of these three do poorly against Sinbad. So if you then maybe pick someone like Luke and Bigfoot, who again are fine against Tesla, Jill, Yen, a little red pick would be quite reasonable for the opponent, who again is bad against Sinbad. So by not always picking the optimal characters, you can kind of influence your opponent to what they actually pick to then get a really good last pick onto them, which just counters their whole draft and might throw them off, and they might not know what to do from there on. Of course, this will not work always, because if the opponent is just careful enough, they will avoid it. And you have to be careful yourself, because if you pick two bad characters, um, well, it won't work, because from there on they will just like ban your last pick, and then yeah, you have your 3 mediocre characters against their 3 very good ones. So yeah, you have to watch out a bit with this, but it can definitely work. Whereas on the other hand, you can also just go for shutdown character archetypes. Now, often instead of picking the best fighter, again, it might be better to pick a very polarized fighter that shuts down specific archetypes. So with this strategy, you don't want to incentivize the opponent to pick certain characters. No, you want to shut them down from picking certain characters. The idea is to limit your opponent's options by picking a suboptimal character that you can just self-ban later. They, however, of course, don't know if you will actually self-ban the character, so they still have to so they still are forced to draft around your suboptimal pick. Best example of this would, of course, be someone like Wukong. If the opponent maybe pick Yenenga first, you might want to pick someone like Tesla and Wukong together, even though Wukong isn't great against Yen. The reason is that Wukong is very, very good against Tesla's biggest counters, Bigfoot and Achilles, and also just shuts down the whole linear archetype. So from here on, anything like Bigfoot, Achilles, Moon Knight, Sinbad, they basically all become not relevant anymore for your opponent, whereas you yourself can then safely pick them. This way you have more freedom with your later picks yourself, while your opponent will have a bad time actually deciding which characters they still want to go. So that's really cool. I tend to do this in like every second draft or something like that. Um, and even if Wukong then should be very bad at the end, you can just self-ban him. And yeah, since you limited your opponent's options so well, you might have some favorable matchups in the other 3 characters. So yeah, in conclusion, Banquest is a very interesting draft format for competitive Unmatched. It gives both players distinct roles that both have their ups and downs. Since the whole format is based on reactionary picking and banning, extensive knowledge of key matchups is required to not get countered into oblivion. Riskier picks like Raptors or Sinbad have become way more common just due to the increased amount of knowledge that you get on your opponent and your ways to influence their draft. So yeah, that should be it. Thank you for watching. I really hope that this guide could help you understand the Banquest draft format a bit more. Also, I hope that you learned something new about the game in general today. And just to say, this video took way more effort to make than I previously imagined. So this one time, I will ask you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you liked it. Um, Also, tell me in the comments if you want to see something similar for Arsenal, or maybe even the ladders on each month. So yeah, we'll see. And yeah, until next time.